Hello everybody and welcome to another mighty episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below along with other places you can find me. Previously on the channel, we talked about how a drug-addled teenager named Bob Reynolds stole and consumed an experimental super soldier serum which caused his troubled psyche to manifest two distinct personas. On the one hand, there was the Sentry, an extremely powerful archetypal superhero who Bob physically transformed into. On the other, the Void, who emerged as a separate, malevolent entity, which some have speculated is actually a much older being dating back to biblical times. In the early days of the Marvel Age of Heroes, the Void took on the role of a costumed supervillain and battled the Sentry as his arch-nemesis. Bob eventually learned that this sadistic serial killer was emerging from within his own mind, and under the mental influence of the manipulative mutant mastermind, subconsciously tapped into his dormant psionic abilities, erasing all knowledge of the Sentry and the Void from the world at large. He stayed forgotten for years, living an unfulfilling existence with his wife Lindy, but eventually his own memories began to stir, leading to the return of both the Sentry and the Void. When last we left off, with the world at large unaware of his previous exploits, the Sentry made his public debut as a member of the New Avengers. As a member of this team, he was a powerful asset and stood out as one of the heaviest hitters in Avengers history. However, Bob also suffered from a number of mental health issues, including schizophrenia, agoraphobia, and generalized anxiety disorder, and while he was actively being treated for these conditions, the threat of the Void constantly lurked inside of him. In one incident, the New Avengers battled the former Black Widow, Yelena Belova, who at the time was a supervillain with the power-copying abilities of the Super Adaptoid. In the clash, she attempted to copy the powers of the Sentry, but in doing so also felt what it was like to have the Void inside of her, and collapsed as a result. After that, there were a number of large-scale conflicts in relatively rapid succession, each of which had notable consequences for America's superhuman population. During the superhero Civil War, when the community was split over the controversial Superhuman Registration Act, Bob joined Tony Stark's pro-registration side against Captain America's anti-SRA resistance. When Stark then won the war and launched his initiative to have a registered superhero team assigned to each state, the Sentry remained a member of his mighty Avengers in New York. One of the first foes the team encountered after that was an incarnation of Ultron, who absorbed Iron Man and used the Extremis technology in his body to transform into a human-machine hybrid in the image of Janet Van Dyne. As part of his ongoing assault on the Avengers, Ultron murdered the Sentry's wife, Lindy, nearly causing him to lose control and fully become the Void, before the team's field leader, Carol Danvers, successfully snapped him out of it long enough for Hank Pym and the other Avengers to restore Tony to normal, defeating Ultron once again. Bob then went back to his wife and realized that when he touched his body before, his powers had somehow brought her back to life. Not long after that, during the events of World War Hulk, in which the Green Goliath returned from the planet Sakaar and sought vengeance on the Illuminati for exiling him, the Sentry proved to be the only Avenger who could go toe-to-toe with the Hulk in his absurdly powerful World Breaker form. The fight between them essentially ended in a draw when their energies forced each other to revert back to their powerless human forms. Later, there was an incident in which the shape-shifting Skrulls began the final phase of their secret invasion plans, launching a full-scale assault on the heroes of Earth. One of the earliest skirmishes that resulted from this occurred in the Savage Land, where the mighty Avengers battled a group of Skrulls that were impersonating past incarnations of various heroes. Knowing they couldn't overpower the Sentry physically, a Skrull that arrived in the shape of the Vision tricked Bob into thinking that it was actually the Void, and that he had inadvertently caused the entire invasion, thus making him flee into space. But while there, the Void was able to overwhelm him and take control. As the invasion progressed and battles broke out across New York City, Lindy Reynolds was attacked by one of their newly created Super Skrulls. However, she was saved by the Void, who returned to Earth as a dark reflection of the Sentry and claimed that it would protect her whenever Bob couldn't. Now, this invasion was ultimately repelled, but Tony Stark's failure to prevent it in the first place left him discredited in the eyes of the government and the general public, while Norman Osborn's successful kill shot on the Skrull Queen caused his efforts to be lauded and his popularity to soar. As a result, Osborn was put in charge of the Avengers and filled his team with villains posing as heroes, like Venom as Spider-Man and Bullseye as Hawkeye. Approaching the Sentry privately, Osborn admitted and explained to him that he was the original Green Goblin, but had put his past behind him and could relate to his own struggles with keeping the Void at bay. As a result, Osborn was able to help Bob maintain control by getting him to repeat the mantra, "There is no void." Because of this, Osborn was able to use his charismatic and overbearing personality to manipulate Bob into remaining loyal to his new regime, while most of his former teammates left. One of the first foes that Osborn's Dark Avengers faced was the ancient sorceress Morgan Le Fay, and while the Sentry succeeded in beheading this enemy at Norman's command, her temporal abilities allowed her to quickly return, coming back from the past, seemingly killing Bob as she did. However, when the rest of the team ultimately returned to Avengers Tower, they found a confused Sentry waiting for them, seemingly having resurrected himself. With the Sentry appearing to be unstable, unpredictable, and unkillable, his teammates began to worry what would happen if he ever got out of control. Regardless, Osborn continued to manipulate and use him for his own purposes, even coaxing him into allowing the Void to take control for certain missions. Meanwhile, Lindy Reynolds grew increasingly afraid of her own husband, and at one point even tried to kill him with an alien weapon that he kept in the Watchtower. However, this only caused the Void to seize control once again, resurrecting and restoring himself. Becoming suicidal in the face of this, Lindy begged the Void to end her life, and the Void nearly did so before Bob forced his way to the surface and stopped it. Bob then tried to destroy both himself and the Void by flying them both into the sun, but suffice it to say, this didn't work. Regaining control and returning to Earth, the Void threatened to destroy New York City, declaring that while Bob wouldn't let him kill Lindy, he would punish her by creating a world that they couldn't live in. Norman eventually talked the Void down, convincing him that while he and his team were unable to kill him, if he didn't stop, then the likes of Reed Richards, Tony Stark, and Doctor Doom would find a way to do it. After that incident, Osborn sent Bullseye to eliminate Lindy from the equation entirely and dump her body in the Atlantic Ocean. This nearly caused the Void to go on another rampage, however he reverted back to his Bob Reynolds persona when Osborn and Bullseye convinced him that her death was self-inflicted. The whole situation started coming to a head when Osborn and his Avengers launched an attack on the city of Asgard, which at the time was hovering over the fields of Broxton, Oklahoma. When one of the Dark Avengers, the God of War Ares, learned that Osborn had tricked him into participating in the attack under false pretenses, he turned against his teammates and fought alongside his Asgardian allies. However, it seems that even a God of War was no match for the Void-controlled Sentry, who effortlessly tore the Olympian asunder. In the midst of the fighting, a number of heroic Avengers were assembled by a recently resurrected Captain America and joined the fray on Asgard's behalf. As the tide of battle started to turn against his favor, Osborn, in a fit of defiance, ordered Bob to bring the entire city crashing down, which he quickly did single-handedly. At the hands of the Sentry, Asgard had fallen. Making matters worse, the Void fully enveloped the Sentry, transforming into an unrestrained and uncontrollable form. Regretting his allyship with Osborn and his role in the siege of Asgard leading up to these events, the god of mischief, Loki, attempted to fight back using the mystical Norn stones, but he too was struck down and killed by the unstoppable Void. In the end, Thor was able to hold the monster at bay long enough for Iron Man to seize control of one of Osborn's helicarriers, turning it into a giant bullet and crashing it into the Void. The resulting explosion momentarily weakened the Void, allowing Bob to seize control just long enough for Thor to deliver a final, fatal blow, killing Robert Reynolds. Thor then took Bob's body into space and laid him to rest in the heat of the sun. A tombstone was placed in a New York cemetery with both Robert and Lindy Reynolds' names inscribed on it, and a number of heroes arrived to pay their respects to the fallen comrade they were unable to save, including the Sentry's former sidekick, Scout, who retired years prior after losing his arm in an encounter with the Void. Immediately after his death, the Sentry's watchtower disappeared from its perch at the top of Avengers headquarters. The artificial intelligence clock declared that it would rebuild the tower in anticipation of his master's return, however it has not been seen since. This time the Sentry was unable to resurrect himself, but whatever remained of him after being thrown into the sun was later recovered by a pair of siblings known as the Apocalypse Twins. Their story is a fairly complicated one if we were to dive too deeply into it, but in short, they were conceived during a brief affair between the X-Man Angel, while he was under the control of his darker Archangel persona, and a Japanese mutant named Ichisumi, who served the role of Pestilence in Apocalypse's so-called Final Horseman. Shortly after their birth, the twins, Eamon and Uriel, were abducted by the time-traveling warlord, Kang the Conqueror, who brought them to dark alternate timelines and intended on raising them for his own purposes. Specifically, he wanted them to serve as mutant messiahs that would lead their people away from their own Earth, 616, making it easier for Kang to conquer that reality. However, after reaching adulthood, returning to their native timeline shortly after their birth, and reuniting with their mother, Pestilence, the twins plotted to rob Kang of his conquest by destroying the very planet that he wanted to rule over. Armed with the axe Yarnbjorn, which had been enchanted to cut through even celestial armor, the Apocalypse twin, Uriel, struck down a celestial gardener and stole an artifact called a Death Seed, which had been used to empower beings like Apocalypse. Adding this to a collection of similar artifacts they had spent their life gathering, the twins used these life and death seeds to reanimate the corpses of 4 dead superhumans, transforming them into their horsemen of death. This included Eric Williams, the Grim Reaper, Sean Cassidy, aka Banshee, Akihito, aka Wolverine's son Daken, and of course Bob Reynolds, the Sentry. What followed was an ongoing conflict between the Apocalypse twins and the Unity Squad, a member of heroes made up of both Avengers and X-Men. In these battles, the Sentry claimed that the Void had left him, and that his mortal ailments as Bob Reynolds had been cleansed by the heat of the sun. He also implied that the Apocalypse twins had restored him from a single atom, and occasionally demonstrated his newfound undeath by ripping apart his own flesh before reforming once again. In any event, things took a turn for the worse when Exitar, the celestial executioner, arrived to destroy the Earth as punishment for the death of the celestial gardener. Technically, it did succeed in obliterating the planet, although the Earth's mutant population was transported to the idyllic Planet X, and several years later Kang intervened with a team of superhumans gathered from across space-time and projected several of the Unity Squad members' minds back in time to prevent the Earth's destruction. Fortunately, even while corrupted by the Death Seed, the Sentry still considered himself a protector of mankind, and in the end he helped a supercharged rogue slow Exeter's approach long enough for Thor to strike a fatal blow to the Celestial's neck with Yarnbjorn, causing its cosmic energy to spill out. With the Earth saved and the Apocalypse twins defeated, the Sentry departed, pushing Exeter's body into deep space. However, he warned that the Celestial's energy had not disappeared, but simply retreated to the enigmatic dimension known as the White Hot Room, to await its own rebirth. After that, the Sentry wandered the starways looking for a way to once again end his life, but was eventually found by Doctor Strange, who had gone out searching for him. The Sentry asked the Sorcerer to kill him, and while Strange didn't know how to accomplish that, he was able to help reverse the effects of the Death Seed, restoring the Sentry to normal. He also constructed a pocket dimension in Bob's mindscape, allowing him to live a peaceful life as Robert Reynolds, while his body remained adrift in space. Strange ensured that the Void would not be able to interfere with this, mystically locking Bob's dark persona in a vault within the Sanctum Sanctorum. But then there was an incident in which the mystical trinity known as the Vishanti chose Loki, who'd been resurrected after the Siege of Asgard, to supplant Doctor Strange as the Sorcerer Supreme. Initially, Stephen reluctantly accepted this demotion, but when he learned that Loki was after the exile of Sing Soon, a spell that could potentially transfer all the world's magic to him, he decided to intervene and recruited the Sentry to aid him, bringing the fallen hero back to Earth. The Sentry also helped Strange invade the realm of Asgard so that he could obtain a boon from the World Tree that would allow him to oppose Loki. Rather than participate in the ensuing fight directly, the Sentry stayed in a Himalayan temple where he allowed the physical cost of Strange's spellcasting to be transferred to him, which he could easily endure with his level of power. However, during the battle, the Sanctum's librarian, Zelma Stanton, cast a spell that neutralized both combatants' magic. She hoped this would force them to talk, but of course it just left Strange at the mercy of Loki's superior physical strength. Furthermore, Loki was convinced that the spell he was after was inside the Sanctum's locked vault, and demanded that Stephen open it. Desperate to stop Loki and seeing little choice, Strange opened the door, releasing the Void, and causing Loki to come face to face with a creature that had already killed him once before. However, after the Void possessed Doctor Strange, taking full control over him, it did exactly what he didn't want, and pointed out that the exile of Sing Soon had been secretly hidden inside Zelma Stanton's soul. Claiming the spell for himself, Loki separated Strange from the Void before using the exile of Sing Soon to jumpstart the Earth's dragon lines, which had been damaged in a previous incident. Strange and Loki then fought side by side with the Sentry, and the three forced the Void back into its magical prison. Enraged by what Stephen had done, the Sentry nearly struck him down, but Strange was saved again by Loki. The Sentry then departed once again, but he knew that the Void could not be contained forever. Sometime later, with help from Tony Stark, he sought an alternative solution to the problem. Using a device called a confluctor, which he had obtained from an alien planet in one of his early adventures, Bob could enter the mental pocket dimension as a dreamscape in which his Sentry and Void personas were free to battle each other without fear of collateral damage. This world had its own watchtower, as well as facsimiles of the Sentry's old sidekicks, Scout and Watchdog. By using the confluctor once every 24 hours, Bob could keep his inner demons at bay and continue to live a normal life in the real world as Robert Reynolds. He got a job working in a diner alongside the real Scout, Billy Turner, and a waitress named Jenny, who served as the inspiration for a new ally in his dreamscape, the Sentress. Bob shared these secrets with his old ally, but Billy had grown bitter and resentful, and wished that he could enter the dreamscape as well. To this end, he conspired with their old enemy, Cranio, and had him use Professor Cornelius's original notes in an attempt to recreate the Sentry serum. After that, Billy broke into Bob's apartment and stole the confluctor. Returning home and finding the device missing, Bob began to panic. He was taken into custody for failing to honor his arrangement with Stark and, unwilling to lose his freedom, transformed once again into the Sentry. However, this time his physical body was inhabited solely by the Sentry persona, while his Bob Reynolds identity was shunted into the dreamscape without powers. Meanwhile, Cranio was using the confluctor to enter the dreamscape, and without the Sentry there to stop him, overwhelmed and murdered Bob's allies in that world. Upon learning from Cranio that Bob's human persona had been cast into the dreamscape, Billy deduced that the Sentry was likely in the physical world again, and took the recreated serum to endow himself with similar powers. And so while Iron Man clashed with the Sentry, desperately trying to contain him, their conflict was interrupted by Billy Turner, who leapt into the fray. At the same time, Bob encountered the Void in the dreamscape and admitted that he needed his help. Deciding to embrace his darker side rather than run from it, Bob joined with the Void once again, causing his three personas to coalesce into something new. A superhuman form that was neither the Sentry nor the Void, but a combination of the two. Billy attacked, attempting to take down this new foe, but it seems that either the serum he took was imperfect, or he was, as his body was unable to handle the raw power it was channeling. In the end, this darker Sentry used his Void powers to envelop Billy in blackness, appearing before him in human form and snapping his neck, killing him once and for all. Bob was soon confronted by the Avengers, but flew off after a brief confrontation. He quickly tracked down Cranio, who briefly pulled them both into the dreamscape. However, the Dark Sentry escaped and shattered the villain's helmet, rendering him powerless and leaving his mind trapped. The Avengers continued to pursue Reynolds, but before their battle could resume, the Dark Sentry fled. He later returned to Earth once again and briefly clashed with Black Panther's agents of Wakanda as he struggled to understand his new state. With the Void growing more dominant, he wished to rid himself of his dark side once again and went to one of his oldest friends, Reed Richards, for help. After examining him extensively, Reed determined that separating them was impossible within the physical laws of their universe. However, it might be possible in another, and so Reed suggested that Bob try doing so in the antimatter universe known as the Negative Zone. There, by absorbing enough negative cosmic rays, Bob was indeed able to separate himself from the Void, but doing so had unforeseen consequences. When the two separated, the Void took all their power with it and manifested physically as the Sentry, but without his heroic persona. Bob, meanwhile, was left incomplete and would eventually die as a result. Furthermore, this separation ripped a hole in reality, linking the Negative Zone to a realm known as the Cancerverse, an alternate reality in which nothing could die, populated by twisted variants of Earth's greatest heroes. Taking over the Cancerverse's forces, the Void-controlled Sentry launched an all-out invasion of the Negative Zone, which drew the attention of heroes from the positive universe including Nova, Beta Ray Bill, and the Fantastic Four. In the midst of this conflict, the Silver Surfer came upon the weakened Bob Reynolds, and the two merged so that Bob could join the fight as well. In the end, Bob was forced to rejoin with the Void, separating from the Surfer at the same time, and the Cancerverse invasion came to an end when the hole in reality was sealed. In the aftermath of all this, the restored Sentry opted to stay in the Negative Zone and watch over it while trying to tame his dark side. Sometime later, there was a threat large enough for the heroes of Earth to call Bob for help, the King in Black and creator of the alien symbiotes, Null. However, Null was a primordial god who ruled over a dark void that existed before the Big Bang, and as such his powers were uniquely suited to counter Bob's, allowing him to rip the hero apart before absorbing the Sentry's void into his own. Of course, despite his death, the story goes on, but that is all the time we have for today. If you want to know what happened to the Sentry's soul, you can check out the miniseries King in Black: Return of the Valkyries. For what happened to his body, there's King in Black Thunderbolts, and then the book simply titled Strange, specifically the 9th and 10th issues, but of course you can read the whole thing for more context. Finally, for what ultimately happened to all that power he had, there's the most recent Sentry miniseries, which just about brings you up to date. But thank you so much for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. That being said, if there's anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!